You know, relationships rarely fall apart in a single moment. They erode slowly, quietly, in the small, sharp exchanges that become so normal we no longer notice their weight, the sighs, the sarcastic comments, the eye rolls, the tiny battles over nothing that slowly become everything. Bickering is not passion, it's not playfulness. It's the slow drip of disconnection, one drop at a time, when two people who once looked at each other with awe begin seeing each other as opponents. Every sentence becomes a negotiation for survival. Every conversation silently asks, "Are you with me or against me?" And when that becomes the question, love begins to suffocate. We don't bicker because we enjoy conflict. We bicker because we don't feel heard, because we don't feel understood, because somewhere, deep down, we fear the distance growing between us, but instead of naming the fear, we fire bullets of irritation. Instead of reaching for each other, we reach for the last word. Instead of expressing our longing, we express our frustration. And we forget something essential. A relationship cannot grow where there is no safety, not physical safety. Emotional safety, the kind where you can show your imperfections without being punished, the kind where you can express your needs without being mocked, the kind where you can be vulnerable without being dismissed. If you truly want your relationship to thrive, stop trying to win the argument. Start trying to understand the human being in front of you. Stop listening to reply, listen to discover, stop assuming, start asking. Stop reacting from your wounds, speak from your wisdom, because behind every complaint is a desire, behind every argument is a longing, behind every defensive wall is a soft heart afraid of being hurt again. You weren't brought together to destroy each other with words, you were brought together to mirror each other's humanity, to reveal each other's potential, to hold each other through seasons of growth and seasons of struggle. So choose awareness over autopilot, choose intention over impulse, choose to pause before you speak, breathe before you react, and love before you judge. A relationship doesn't heal when the other person changes. A relationship heals when both people decide that connection matters more than ego, when they choose curiosity over control, when they remember that their partner is not the enemy. Disconnection is, you deserve a relationship where your words build, not break, where your voice soothes, not scars, where your presence feels like home, not a battlefield. Stop the bickering. Not because you should fear the end of your relationship, but because you should honor the beauty of it. Because love is far too precious to be wasted on war. Choose peace, choose understanding, choose each other, again and again and again. Constant bickering doesn't begin loudly. It begins quietly, almost invisibly, woven into the daily routines of a relationship. A sigh here, a sharp tone there, a sarcastic remark disguised as humor. Individually, they seem harmless, just small sparks of irritation that couples brush off as normal. But over time, these sparks accumulate. They form a pattern, an emotional climate, a way of relating that slowly erodes the foundation of trust. Trust doesn't collapse dramatically. It leaks out through these tiny fractures, one dismissive exchange at a time. Emotional safety is the invisible oxygen of a relationship. Without it, everything becomes fragile. The moment two people stop feeling safe with each other, safe to express, safe to soften, safe to be seen, every word becomes loaded with fear. That fear disguises itself as defensiveness, impatience, criticism, or withdrawal. Bickering becomes the language of survival, not connection. Each partner becomes hyper-attuned to threat, not love. They listen for what might hurt them, not for what might heal them. What makes bickering so destructive is not the content of the argument, but what it symbolizes. I don't trust you to receive me gently. When trust is bruised, even the smallest misunderstanding feels like an attack. A forgotten task becomes proof of carelessness. A change in tone becomes evidence of disrespect. A simple question becomes a challenge. The relationship shifts from being a partnership to a subtle power struggle, and both people start guarding themselves instead of giving themselves. Emotional safety allows vulnerability, but bickering punishes vulnerability. When one partner shares a concern and the other responds with irritation or dismissal, the message received is, "Your feelings complicate things." Slowly, they stop sharing. They learn to keep quiet, to suppress their needs, to silence their truth. But silence does not equal peace, it equals distance. The more they hold inside, the more resentment grows. And resentment always leaks out. It shows up as sarcasm, passive-aggressive remarks, or constant criticism disguised as just being honest. Bickering also rewires how partners interpret each other. Once trust is weakened, their internal narrative changes. They stop assuming good intentions. They start assuming the worst. He forgot because he doesn't care. She snapped because she never listens. These internal stories become emotional filters, turning even neutral interactions into conflicts. Over time, the relationship becomes a cycle. One partner reacts from hurt, the other reacts from fear, and both believe they are defending themselves against the other. They forget that once they stood on the same team. When emotional safety deteriorates, couples no longer speak from their hearts. They speak from their wounds. They don't share what they truly feel. They share what protects them. Instead of "I feel lonely," they say, "You never spend time with me." Instead of "I need reassurance," they say, "Why do you always make me feel unimportant?" The real message hides beneath layers of accusation, and because the delivery feels hostile, the partner responds with more hostility. And just like that, a simple emotional need transforms into another pointless argument. The tragedy is that most bickering is not about the present moment at all. It's a symptom of accumulated pain, of conversations that never happened, of emotions that were never acknowledged. The couple fights about dishes, tone, timing, or routines, but underneath, they are really fighting for connection, for attention, for affection, for validation. They're fighting for the feeling they once had, the feeling of being deeply understood. The slow erosion of emotional safety doesn't announce itself. It shows up in the hesitation before speaking, the tightening of the chest, the anticipation of conflict. It shows up in the way partners brace themselves, waiting for the next remark that will sting. And once a relationship reaches that point, love becomes something fragile, something easily bruised, easily overshadowed by the noise of constant conflict. This is why constant bickering is so dangerous. It kills trust. It kills emotional intimacy. It kills the sense of we. And without those, a relationship cannot breathe. Small fights rarely come from the surface-level issues we think they're about. The argument may start over a misplaced item, a delayed reply, an undone chore, or a tone of voice, but underneath these moments are deeper emotional currents. Human beings rarely erupt because of what is happening right now. We react because of what has been accumulating within us. Bickering becomes the smoke, not the fire. The fire is always something more tender, more vulnerable, more difficult to admit, a need that hasn't been met, a fear that hasn't been spoken, a longing that hasn't been acknowledged. Unmet needs are not loud. They don't announce themselves. They sit quietly inside the heart, waiting, hoping, longing to be seen. When those needs go unrecognized, they transform. They become frustration, impatience, and irritation. Instead of saying, "I miss you," a partner says, "You never spend time with me." Instead of expressing, "I need reassurance," they say, "Why do you always act like you don't care?" What was once soft becomes sharp. What was once a longing becomes a complaint. And the partner hearing the complaint responds to the sharpness, not the tenderness underneath it. Fear works the same way. Fear rarely shows up as fear. It shows up as defensiveness, sarcasm, or attack. A fear of abandonment becomes clinginess or accusation. A fear of inadequacy becomes overreaction to criticism. A fear of not being valued becomes hypersensitivity to small gestures. In relationships, people often feel safer expressing anger than admitting fear. Anger feels strong. Fear feels exposed. And so the bickering begins, not because the couple enjoys fighting, but because they don't know how to speak the language of their deeper emotions. Sometimes the deeper issue is a longing for connection. The couple may be going through a busy season, overwhelmed by work, children, or responsibilities. Emotional intimacy fades quietly, not dramatically. And as that closeness weakens, partners begin to mistake distance for disinterest. The heart panics. Instead of saying, "I need more closeness with you," they find themselves fighting over superficial details. The real message gets buried under irritation. They fight about the schedule, but they're really fighting for affection. They fight about chores, but they're really fighting to feel like partners again. They fight about tone, but they're really fighting to feel valued. Another layer of this dynamic is unspoken resentment. When something bothers us, and we don't address it honestly, it doesn't disappear, it mutates. It becomes a silent tension that threads itself into every interaction. A comment that would otherwise be harmless becomes a trigger. A neutral gesture becomes interpreted as criticism. The partner becomes a symbol of the unresolved hurt. And each unresolved moment adds another brick to the emotional wall between them in many relationships. The pattern goes like this. One partner feels something, doesn't express it directly, acts it out in irritation, and the other partner responds to the irritation rather than the feeling. This creates a loop, confusion, defensiveness, and misunderstandings piling up on both sides. The couple believes they are fighting about one thing, but they are actually lost in deeper emotional territory neither of them has named. Even childhood wounds often influence this dynamic. A person who grew up feeling ignored may interpret a distracted partner as rejection. Someone who learned to walk on eggshells may interpret a small disagreement as a relational earthquake. The past whispers into the present, shaping how each person hears and responds. And because neither partner usually makes the connection consciously, the argument feels disproportionate to the moment. When small fights mask deeper needs, the relationship suffers because the real issues never get addressed. The couple exhausts themselves battling symptoms instead of causes. They argue repeatedly but resolve nothing. They apologize for words, for tone, for timing, but never talk about the wounds beneath those words, the fears beneath that tone, or the needs driving those reactions. This is why small bickering can feel endless. The fight ends, but the feeling stays. The frustration fades temporarily, but the need remains unmet. The distance closes slightly, but the fear continues to simmer. The couple returns to daily life, but the emotional landscape remains unchanged. What appears on the surface as petty conflict is often a plea. See me, hear me, understand me, reach for me. Until those deeper longings are spoken and honored, bickering will continue to be the outlet for unexpressed emotions that are waiting desperately to be acknowledged. When couples get caught in repeated patterns, defensiveness, blame, withdrawal, they aren't fighting each other as much as they are fighting their own internal reactions. These patterns become automatic, almost subconscious. They take over the moment a partner feels threatened, misunderstood, or judged. Instead of responding with clarity, presence, or intention, each person slips into a familiar emotional script. It's as if a switch flips inside the brain, and the relationship becomes a battlefield of old habits rather than a space for understanding. Defensiveness is one of the most common patterns. It happens when someone feels accused, even if the partner didn't intend accusation. A simple request like, "Can you help with this?" gets interpreted as, "You never do enough." A comment such as, "I felt hurt by that," gets heard as, "You're a bad partner." Defensiveness is a shield. It protects the ego from feeling inadequate or guilty, but while it protects one person, it also blocks connection. It stops communication from moving forward. Instead of hearing the partner's perspective, a defensive person hears only threat. And when both partners get defensive at the same time, the conversation collapses into a loop of justification and counterattack. Blame is another pattern that pulls couples away from truth. Blame is the easiest emotion to reach for when someone feels overwhelmed or vulnerable. It shifts discomfort onto the other person. If you can point the finger outward, you don't have to sit with your own fear, sadness, or disappointment. But blame creates winners and losers, and relationships cannot survive that mindset. When one partner feels blamed, they respond by either attacking back or withdrawing to avoid further pain. Either way, the original issue becomes buried beneath layers of accusation. What needed care ends up receiving hostility. Withdrawal is just as damaging. When someone withdraws, it often looks like silence, shutting down, stonewalling, or not engaging. It may seem like the calm response, but withdrawal is often emotional abandonment in disguise. It communicates, "Your feelings are too much. I can't deal with this. You're on your own." Withdrawal isn't always intentional. Many people withdraw because conflict overwhelms them, or because they fear losing control, or because they don't know how to handle intense emotions. But even unintentional withdrawal leaves the other partner feeling alone, rejected, or unimportant. And loneliness inside a relationship is one of the most painful experiences a person can feel. Once these patterns set in, couples start relating to each other not as lovers or teammates, but as adversaries. They begin anticipating conflict before it even starts. A partner's face tightens slightly, and suddenly an argument feels inevitable. A certain tone appears, and both people brace themselves. The relationship becomes coded in subtle cues that trigger old responses. This is why couples often say, "We always end up in the same fight." The topic changes, but the pattern stays exactly the same. These patterns also block vulnerability, which is the heart of intimacy. Instead of saying, "I'm hurt," someone says, "You're impossible to talk to." Instead of admitting, "I'm afraid you're drifting away from me," they say, "You don't care anymore." Vulnerability asks for closeness. These patterns create distance. When both partners stay in those protective modes, no one gets to the truth. They speak from fear, from pride, from past wounds, but not from the part of the heart that actually wants understanding. What makes these patterns so painful is that each partner often believes they are doing what they must to survive. The defensive one thinks they are protecting themselves. The blaming one thinks they are fighting for fairness. The withdrawing one thinks they are keeping the peace. But each pattern unintentionally harms the relationship. Each one stops emotional intimacy from growing. Each one communicates disconnection, even when the heart is longing for closeness. Breaking these patterns requires awareness. It requires the courage to pause before reacting and ask, "What is really happening inside me right now?" It requires recognizing that the partner's tone might not be an attack, but an expression of their own fear or fatigue. It requires remembering that the relationship is not a game of right and wrong, but a shared journey in which both people want to feel seen, safe, and valued. These patterns do not mean the relationship is broken. They simply mean the couple has forgotten how to reach for each other. They've gotten lost in reactions instead of returning to vulnerability. But once those patterns are recognized, they can be rewired. Once the couple sees the cycle, they can interrupt it. And once they interrupt it, they open the door to deeper connection. One chosen response at a time. Repairing conflict is not something that happens accidentally. It doesn't unfold simply because time has passed or because the argument has quieted. Repair is intentional. It requires a deliberate shift from reacting to reconnecting, from defending to understanding, from winning to healing. Many couples assume that if they ignore a conflict long enough, the relationship will naturally return to normal. But unresolved tension doesn't disappear. It settles into the emotional space between two people and shapes how they relate going forward. True repair requires effort, presence, and humility. When partners are in conflict, both often become absorbed in their own hurt or frustration. They focus on what was said to them, how they were misunderstood, or how they were wronged. But repair begins when each person becomes curious about the other's inner experience. This curiosity is not passive. It is an act of love. It asks, "What were you feeling in that moment? What pain or fear was behind your reaction? What were you trying to protect?" These questions shift the conversation from accusation to understanding. They soften the emotional landscape and make room for truth rather than tension. Repair also requires slowing down. The pace of conflict is fast. Emotions flare quickly. Words spill out before they're fully formed and reactions become automatic. Slowing down interrupts this pattern. It gives space for breath, reflection, and awareness. A partner who pauses before responding is not avoiding the conflict. They are choosing not to let the conflict choose their behavior. They are choosing intentionality over impulse. This pause can be as simple as taking a deep breath, stepping away for a moment, or saying, "I need a second to understand what's happening." These small moments of mindfulness can prevent hours of unnecessary damage. Another essential part of repair is taking responsibility. Ownership is not about blame, it's about awareness. It's the ability to say, "I see how my tone hurt you," or "I understand that my words came out sharper than I intended." Responsibility is not an admission of weakness, it's an expression of emotional maturity. When one partner owns their part of the conflict, it creates an opening for the other to soften too. It signals that the goal is not to assign guilt, but to restore harmony. Repair also requires emotional honesty. Often, the real hurt hides beneath the surface of the argument. The couple may fight about dishes, chores, schedules, or routines, but beneath those topics are deeper emotions: loneliness, exhaustion, fear, shame, or longing. Repair happens when those deeper truths are spoken. When a partner says, "I snapped because I felt invisible," or "I raised my voice because I was afraid you were pulling away," the fight transforms into a moment of connection. Vulnerability turns conflict into closeness, and yet, Honesty must be paired with gentleness. Raw truths delivered harshly create more wounds. Repair asks each partner to speak their truth with tenderness, to express feelings without turning them into weapons, to share pain without assigning it as the partner's fault. This balance of honesty and kindness is what allows repair to actually heal rather than harm. Forgiveness is another essential ingredient. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or minimizing the hurt. It means choosing to release the emotional grip of that moment so the relationship can move forward. Couples often get stuck because they replay the argument in their minds over and over, reliving the hurt instead of letting it pass. Repair invites both people to acknowledge the pain, but then create space for renewal. Forgiveness becomes an active practice, not a passive wish. Additionally, repair thrives on reassurance. Conflict often shakes a sense of security. Partners may wonder, do you still love me? Are we still okay? Are you still with me? Reassurance, through words, touch, tone, or presence, helps soothe these fears. It reminds the relationship that despite the disagreement, the bond remains intact. It reminds each heart that conflict does not erase commitment. Lastly, repair is a choice that must be made repeatedly. It's not a single action, but a pattern of returning to each other after every rupture. No relationship is defined by the absence of conflict, but by the willingness to heal after conflict. Intentional repair becomes a ritual, a way of saying our connection matters more than this moment. Our love is stronger than this misunderstanding. I choose you even when it's hard. Curiosity is one of the most powerful tools a couple can bring into a relationship, yet it is often overlooked in the heat of conflict. When people argue, they frequently operate on assumptions. You meant this, you always do that, you don't care. These assumptions create mental narratives that amplify resentment and distance. Curiosity, on the other hand, interrupts that automatic pattern. It invites a pause, a question, a willingness to see the other person not as an opponent, but as a complex human being with needs, fears, and experiences that may differ from one's own. It transforms conflict from a battleground into a field of exploration. When curiosity leads the conversation, partners begin to ask questions instead of firing accusations. Instead of saying, "You never listened to me," curiosity asks, "Can you help me understand what you heard when I said that?" Instead of saying, "You don't care about my feelings," curiosity asks, "What was going through your mind when that happened?" These small shifts in phrasing open doors to understanding. They encourage the speaker to explain their inner world and the listener to actively try to comprehend it. What might have been a fight over tone or action becomes an opportunity to connect at a deeper emotional level. Curiosity also encourages empathy, which is the bridge between conflict and intimacy. To be curious is to step outside one's own perspective and temporarily live inside the other person's experience. Empathy is not agreement, it is recognition. It says, "I see that this matters to you, even if I don't experience it the same way." When a partner feels understood, their defenses lower. Anger softens, irritation dissipates, and the emotional walls built from fear or resentment begin to crumble. Curiosity transforms conversations from confrontations into explorations of each other's hearts. Another important aspect of curiosity is that it shifts the focus from proving oneself right to discovering the truth. Most arguments are fueled by the desire to be right or to win. Curiosity asks a different question: what is really happening here for both of us? This simple shift changes the dynamic entirely. Instead of trading blows with words, each partner engages in joint problem-solving. They investigate the emotional currents beneath the surface, uncover hidden fears, and identify unmet needs. Curiosity turns conflict into a collaborative effort rather than a competitive one. Curiosity also teaches patience. When couples approach each other with curiosity, they learn to listen without rushing to judgment. They begin to recognize the difference between hearing words and truly understanding the emotion behind them. This patience allows for reflection rather than reaction, and it interrupts the impulsive patterns of blame and defensiveness that often dominate disagreements. A partner who pauses to ask questions or explore the meaning behind a behavior shows a commitment to understanding, not to attacking, which creates emotional safety in the relationship. In addition, curiosity fosters resilience. Couples who approach challenges with curiosity are less likely to feel defeated by conflict. They understand that disagreement does not signal the end of the relationship, but rather provides insight into areas that require attention. Each conflict becomes a learning opportunity, a mirror reflecting the emotional landscape of the partnership. Curiosity allows partners to navigate misunderstandings with grace and clarity, reducing the likelihood of long-term resentment and emotional distance. Curiosity also nurtures intimacy by valuing the other person as an individual. It sends a subtle but powerful message: I care about your inner world. I want to know you fully. This kind of attention strengthens the emotional bond and encourages both partners to show their authentic selves. The relationship moves beyond surface-level interaction to a place where hearts meet, fears are shared, and trust deepens. When couples cultivate curiosity, conflicts lose much of their destructive power. Words that could have been used to wound instead become tools for understanding. Differences that could have created division instead become points of connection. Curiosity transforms the way partners relate, replacing blame with inquiry, judgment with empathy, and defensiveness with openness. It shifts the energy of the relationship from combat to collaboration, from fear to trust, and from isolation to intimacy. In essence, curiosity strengthens the bond between two people far more than criticism ever could. Love grows when partners choose understanding over winning, because relationships are not competitions. They are co-created spaces where two hearts meet, each with its own needs, fears, and histories. Many conflicts arise not from the substance of disagreement, but from the desire to be right, to have the final word, or to prove that one perspective holds more weight than the other. In these moments, the focus shifts from connection to ego, from intimacy to assertion, and the true essence of love is overshadowed by the urge to dominate. Choosing understanding over winning is a deliberate act of prioritizing the relationship above individual pride, and it requires patience, humility, and conscious effort. When a partner chooses understanding, they step out of the cycle of defensiveness and blame. They listen not to respond, but to truly hear. They listen not to counter, but to comprehend. This kind of listening is radical because it requires slowing down, quieting the inner narrative, and focusing fully on the other person's experience. It is an act of presence that says, I see you, I hear you, your experience matters to me. In doing so, the partner cultivates empathy, the fertile soil in which love can grow. Understanding invites vulnerability, and vulnerability deepens intimacy. Without it, even the most well-intentioned words can become weapons, and even the strongest connection can erode over time. Choosing understanding over winning also involves humility. It is the willingness to acknowledge that one does not have all the answers, that one's perspective is only part of the truth, and that the other person's experience is equally valid. Humility allows a partner to admit mistakes, apologize sincerely, and let go of the need to assert superiority. This act of surrender is not weakness, it is strength disguised as grace. It demonstrates the courage to place love and connection above pride and self-defense. In doing so, it creates a ripple effect, encouraging the other partner to lower defenses and engage with equal openness. Another important aspect is patience. Understanding requires slowing the pace of interactions and allowing space for reflection. Instead of reacting impulsively to a perceived slight, a partner who prioritizes understanding pauses to consider the deeper emotions at play, the unmet needs beneath the words, and the fears that may be influencing behavior. Patience prevents escalation and allows difficult conversations to unfold in a way that nurtures the relationship rather than strains it. Over time, this consistent practice strengthens trust and reinforces the idea that disagreements are not threats, but opportunities for growth and connection. Choosing understanding also reframes conflict itself. Arguments cease to be battles to win and become gateways to mutual insight. When both partners approach disagreements with curiosity and a genuine desire to understand, the conversation shifts from opposition to exploration. They begin to recognize the patterns that trigger conflict, the unspoken needs that underlie words, and the fears that shape reactions. In this space, solutions emerge not from compromise alone, but from shared awareness and alignment. The relationship becomes a partnership in discovery, rather than a contest of egos. Moreover, understanding fosters emotional safety. When one partner feels that their thoughts, feelings, and perspectives are acknowledged and respected, they are more likely to engage authentically, express vulnerability, and take emotional risks. This safety builds resilience within the relationship, allowing both partners to navigate challenges with confidence that they will not be attacked or dismissed. In turn, this encourages the kind of openness that is essential for long-term love, trust, and intimacy. Ultimately, love grows when understanding is chosen over winning because it shifts the energy of the relationship from conflict to connection, from judgment to empathy, and from separation to unity. It transforms disagreements from destructive forces into opportunities for deeper comprehension and alignment. Each act of seeking understanding, each moment of patient listening, each choice to prioritize connection over ego strengthens the emotional bond and cultivates a relational environment where love can thrive. In this way, understanding becomes not just a tool for resolving conflicts, but the very nourishment of enduring, transformative love. Thank you so much for your time, your guidance, and your support. I truly appreciate everything you've done. Wishing you all the best in your journey ahead. Goodbye for now and take care.